Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life. In the grand halls of Pendleton Hall, a scream shatters the night. Sir Reginald Pendleton lies dead, a jewel-encrusted dagger in his heart. Who among the elegant guests, his poised widow, the nervous solicitor, the stoic major, the secretive governess, or the trusted doctor, wields the hand of a killer? As shadows whisper secrets and lies tangle like a web, only Hercule Poirot, with his brilliant mind and unyielding logic, can unravel the truth. A stopped clock, a smudged book, a burned letter. What do they hide? Step into a world of suspense, where every clue counts and the final twist will leave you breathless. Will you dare to follow Poirot into this net of lies? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. In the golden haze of an October afternoon, the rolling hills of Devon shimmered under a sky of unblemished blue. Blackthorn Manor, a sprawling Elizabethan estate nestled among ancient oaks, stood as a monument to faded grandeur. Its ivy-clad towers and mullioned windows spoke of wealth, but the chipped cornices and overgrown rose gardens whispered of neglect. The manor belonged to Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a retired diplomat whose reputation for charm was matched only by his penchant for secrecy. It was to this remote and enigmatic setting that Captain Arthur Hastings, friend and occasional confidant of Hercule Poirot, found himself summoned. Hastings had received the invitation a week prior, penned in Sir Reginald's elegant hand. It requested his presence for a weekend gathering, promising stimulating company and a matter of some delicacy. The vagueness intrigued Hastings, whose life in London had grown predictable since his retirement from military service. He had wired Poirot, hoping the little Belgian detective might join him, but Poirot's reply was non-committal, citing a small matter of the mind that required his attention. Thus, Hastings arrived alone at the manor's wrought-iron gates, his suitcase in hand, and a faint unease stirring in his chest. The gravel drive crunched under his polished shoes as he approached the entrance. The butler, a stooped man named Grayson, with eyes like polished flint, greeted him with a bow. "Captain Hastings, sir. Sir Reginald awaits you in the drawing-room." His voice was clipped, his manner impeccable yet cold, as if he guarded secrets of his own. The drawing-room was a cavern of opulence, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes glaring down from gilded frames. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across the faces of the frame seemed at odds with her sharp, assessing gaze. She offered a polite nod, her fingers toying with a pearl necklace that gleamed against her emerald gown. Beside her stood their daughter, Eleanor, a vivacious young woman of 25 with auburn curls and a laugh that rang like a bell, though Hastings noted a flicker of defiance in her eyes when her father spoke. Next was Dr. Malcolm Fraser, a physician from London, whose spectacles and nervous fidgeting suggested a man more comfortable with books than people. He mumbled a greeting, his hands clasped tightly, as if to steady himself. Then came Mrs. Clara Wentworth, a widow of indeterminate age, her black morning dress stark against her pale skin. Her voice was soft, but her words carried a biting wit that made Hastings uneasy. The final guest was Victor Langston, a businessman with a ruddy complexion and a booming laugh. His tailored suit strained slightly at the seams, and his eyes gleamed with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Heard you were a friend of that detective chap, Poirot," Langston said, clapping Hastings on the shoulder. "Hope we shan't need him this weekend, eh?" Hastings smiled politely, though the comment lingered like a shadow. Sir Reginald had mentioned a matter of delicacy, and the air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension. The guests exchanged pleasantries, but their smiles were brittle, their glances guarded. Eleanor in particular seemed restless, her fingers drumming on the arm of her chair as she spoke of her recent engagement to a man named Charles Rutherford, who was conspicuously absent. "Dinner will be served at 7, Sir Reginald announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Until then, please make yourselves at home." As the guests dispersed, Hastings wandered to the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes and a grand oak desk. A map of the estate lay open on a table, its edges curling like ancient parchment. Hastings studied it, noting the manor's isolation. No other houses for miles, only fields and a narrow road leading to the village. A perfect setting for a quiet weekend, he thought. Yet the knot in his stomach tightened. At precisely 7, the guests reconvened in the dining room, where candlelight cast long shadows across a table laden with crystal and silver. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a rich claret. But the conversation faltered. Lady Beatrice spoke little, her eyes fixed on her husband, who seemed preoccupied with his wine. Eleanor laughed too loudly at Langston's jokes, while Dr. Fraser pushed his food around his plate, his face pale. Mrs. Wentworth, meanwhile, watched everyone with a quiet intensity, her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. As the dessert course arrived, Sir Reginald stood, tapping companionship, but to address a matter of grave importance. "There is among us a secret, one that threatens the very foundation of this house." A hush fell over the table. Hastings leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Before Sir Reginald could continue, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It came from the direction of the library. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock and fear. "Stay here," Sir Reginald barked, striding toward the door. Hastings, ignoring the command, followed close behind, his military instincts kicking in. The others trailed after, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. In the library, they found Grayson, the butler, standing over a crumpled figure on the floor. It was Charles Rutherford, Eleanor's fiancé, his face ashen and his eyes wide with terror. A letter opener lay beside him, its blade stained with blood. Eleanor gasped, clutching her mother's arm, while Dr. Fraser knelt beside the body, his fingers searching for a pulse. "He's dead," Fraser whispered, his voice trembling. "Stabbed through the heart." The room spun around Hastings. He glanced at the map on the table, its edges now splattered with blood. The manor, so serene hours ago, was now a stage for murder. And as the guests whispered and wept, Hastings knew one thing with certainty. Only Hercule Poirot could unravel the net of lies that had ensnared Blackthorn Manor. The clock struck 8, and the fire in the library had burned low. Sir Reginald, his face gray, ordered Grayson to lock the doors. "No one leaves until the police arrive," he said, his voice hollow. But Hastings, his mind racing, slipped away to the telephone in the hall. He dialed Poirot's number, praying the detective was free. "Mon ami," came Poirot's voice, crisp and calm. "You sound agitated. What is this trouble at Blackthorn Manor?" "A murder, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low. "Charles Rutherford, stabbed in the library. You must come at once." There was a pause, then Poirot's reply tinged with curiosity. "Very well, Hastings. "I shall arrive by morning, observe everything, but disturb nothing. The little gray cells, they must have their material." As Hastings hung up, he glanced back at the library door. The guests were still inside, their voices a low hum of fear and suspicion. He thought of Sir Reginald's unfinished speech, the bloodied letter opener, and the map with its crimson stains. Somewhere in this house a killer lurked, and Hastings knew that only Poirot's genius could bring them to light. The night stretched on, heavy with dread, as Blackthorn Manor waited for the arrival of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. Previous evening. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the early riser, had intended to take a brisk walk through the estate's manicured gardens before breakfast. But as he descended the grand staircase, his plans were shattered by a piercing scream that echoed through the cavernous hall. Hastings froze, his hand gripping the banister. The scream had come from the direction of the library, a room he recalled from the previous night's tour as being both grand and forbidding, lined with shelves of leather-bound tomes and dominated by a massive oak desk. His instincts, honed by years of accompanying Hercule Poirot on investigations, propelled him forward. He hurried down the remaining steps, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor, and followed the sound. As he reached the library door, he found Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the housekeeper, standing just inside, her hands pressed to her mouth, her face ashen. Her eyes, wide with horror, were fixed on the floor near the desk. Hastings followed her gaze and felt a jolt of shock. There, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay Sir Reginald Pendleton, the master of the house. His lifeless form was unmistakable, even from a distance. His face, usually florid with good health and better brandy, was now a ghastly grey, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A dark stain spread across the front of his white shirt, and a small ornate dagger, its handle encrusted with what appeared to be emeralds, protruded from his chest. "Good Lord," Hastings muttered, his military training kicking in as he knelt beside the body. He pressed 2 fingers to Sir Reginald's neck, though he knew it was futile. The man was dead, and the chill of his skin suggested he had been so for some hours. Hastings glanced at the housekeeper. "Mrs. Grayson, when did you find him?" "Just now, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I came to dust the library, as I do every morning at 7. The door was ajar, and when I stepped in, oh heavens, I saw him there." She swayed, and Hastings rose quickly to steady her, guiding her to a nearby armchair. "Stay here," he instructed gently. "I'll fetch the others. We mustn't touch anything until the police arrive." Mrs. Grayson nodded weakly, her hands twisting in her apron. Hastings strode back to the hall, his mind racing. Sir Reginald, a man of wealth and influence, had been the gracious host of last night's dinner, regaling his guests with tales of his travels and his collection of rare artifacts. Who could have done this? And why? The dagger, with its distinctive handle, seemed a clue too obvious to ignore, yet Hastings knew better than to jump to conclusions. Poirot had taught him that the most apparent solution was often the least correct. He found the other guests assembling in the drawing room for breakfast, pale and composed, her delicate hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Mr. Charles Langley, Sir Reginald's solicitor and confidant, was murmuring something about the morning schedule. Miss Clara Duval, the French governess to Sir Reginald's ward, young Emily Thorne, stood by the window, her dark eyes scanning the room with an air of guarded alertness. Major Frederick Blake, a retired military man and old friend of Sir Reginald's, was pouring himself a cup of tea, his movements precise, despite the tremor in his hands. And Dr. Simon Hartley, the local physician who had dined with them last night, was already on his feet, his medical bag in hand, as though anticipating a call to action. "There's been a tragedy," Hastings announced, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. Sir Reginald is dead, murdered, it seems, in the library. A collective gasp rose from the group. Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her throat, her emerald necklace catching the light. "Murdered," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how? Who?" "I don't know yet," Hastings replied. "Mrs. Grayson found him just now. There's a dagger in his chest. We must send for the police at once." Dr. Hartley stepped forward, his face grim. "I'll examine the body, if I may. It's my duty as a physician." Hastings nodded. "Very well, but touch nothing else. The scene must remain undisturbed." As Dr. Hartley hurried toward the library, followed by Major Blake, who insisted on accompanying him, Hastings turned to the butler, Mr. Thomas Reed, who had just entered the room. "Reed, send for the police immediately, and ensure no one leaves the estate until they arrive." Reed, a tall stoic man with a face like carved oak, inclined his head. "At once, sir." The room erupted into a flurry of hushed whispers and anxious glances. Miss Duval clutched Emily's hand, whispering something in French to the girl, who looked pale and frightened. Langley adjusted his spectacles, his fingers trembling slightly, while Lady Beatrice stared into the distance, her expression unreadable. Hastings observed them all, his mind already cataloguing their reactions. Poirot would want to know every detail. It was then that he realized the one person who could make sense of this chaos was not yet present. "I must send for Poirot," he said aloud, more to himself than to the others. He excused himself and hurried to the telephone in the hall, dialing the number of Poirot's London flat. The line crackled, and after a moment, the familiar voice of Hercule Poirot answered, crisp and precise. "Mon ami Hastings, what is this urgency that disturbs my morning café au lait?" "Poirot, it's dreadful," Hastings said, his voice low. "Sir Reginald Pendleton has been murdered at his estate, stabbed in the library. I'm here." Almost see Poirot's mustache twitching as he considered the situation. "Murder, you say? In the library of Pendleton Hall? Très intéressant. I shall take the next train. Do nothing, Hastings, until I arrive. Observe, but do not act, and ensure that no one tampers with the scene of the crime." "I understand," Hastings replied, relief washing over him. Poirot's presence would bring order to this chaos. "Hurry, old chap. I am never late, mon ami," Poirot said, and the line went dead. Hastings returned to the drawing room, where the atmosphere had grown even more tense. Dr. Hartley had returned from the library, his face grave. "Sir Reginald was stabbed through the heart," he reported. "Death was instantaneous, likely between midnight and 2 o'clock this morning, judging by the state of the body." "Midnight to 2?" Langley repeated, his voice sharp. "But we were all in bed by then, surely." "Were we?" Miss Duval said softly, her accent lending a musical quality to her words. "I heard footsteps in the corridor around 1 o'clock. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now—" "Footsteps?" Major Blake barked, his military bearing stiffening. "Why didn't you say so earlier, girl?" "I didn't think it important," Miss Duval replied, her eyes narrowing. "People move about at night, do they not?" Hastings made a mental note of her comment, knowing Poirot would want to hear every detail. He glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, 7:45 a.m. The police would arrive soon, but until then, he would follow Poirot's instructions, observe but do not act. He studied the faces around him, noting the flicker of fear in Lady Beatrice's eyes, the way Langley's fingers twitched as he adjusted his tie, the rigid posture of Major Blake, and the quiet intensity of Miss Duval. Even young Emily, sitting silently beside her governess, seemed to be watching everyone with an unsettling awareness. The library, he thought, must hold the key. That dagger, so ostentatious and out of place, was no ordinary weapon. Had it come from Sir Reginald's collection of artifacts, displayed so proudly last night? And what of the alibis? If Dr. Hartley's estimate was correct, the murder had occurred in the dead of night, when the house was supposedly asleep. Someone was lying, and Hastings knew Poirot would uncover the truth. As the distant wail of a police siren broke the silence, Hastings felt a surge of anticipation. The game was afoot, and soon Hercule Poirot would arrive to unravel the tangled net of lies that had ensnared Pendleton Hall. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The police arrived at Pendleton Hall shortly before 9 o'clock, a man accustomed to tragedy. Captain Hastings greeted him, providing a brief account of the morning's discovery, and led him to the library, where Sir Reginald's body still lay, untouched, as per Poirot's instructions. The inspector surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, noting the dagger and the pool of blood now congealing on the rug. "A nasty business," Grayson muttered, crouching beside the body. "This dagger looks like something from a museum, not a murder weapon. We'll need to catalogue it carefully." He turned to Hastings. "You say no one's touched anything?" "Not since Mrs. Grayson found him," Hastings confirmed. Dr. Hartley examined the body briefly to confirm death, but I ensured nothing else was disturbed. Grayson nodded, satisfied, and began issuing orders to his men to secure the room. Hastings, however, felt a growing restlessness. The police were competent, but their methods were blunt, lacking the finesse of the man he knew was en route. Hercule Poirot would see what they could not, details hidden in plain sight, contradictions in behavior, the subtle threads that wove a tapestry of guilt. It was nearly 11 when the sound of another car announced Poirot's arrival. Hastings hurried to the entrance hall, where the diminutive Belgian detective stood, impeccable as ever in a perfectly tailored suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust of travel. His moustache, waxed to precise points, quivered slightly as he surveyed the grandeur of Pendleton Hall. In one hand he held a small leather valise, in the other a silver-tipped walking stick, which he leaned upon with an air of quiet authority. "Mon ami Hastings!" Poirot exclaimed, his green eyes sparkling with interest. "You have summoned me to a most intriguing scene. Murder in a grand English estate. C'est magnifique. Tell me, what have we here?" Hastings recounted the morning's events. The scream, the discovery of Sir Reginald's body, the dagger, and the initial reactions of the household. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers stroking his moustache as he absorbed every detail. When Hastings mentioned the emerald-encrusted dagger, Poirot's eyes narrowed. "An unusual choice for a murder weapon, n'est-ce pas?" he mused. "A dagger so ornate suggests a purpose beyond mere violence. We shall see." He clapped his hands together. "Now, introduce me to this cast of characters, and let us begin the work of the little grey cells." Hastings led Poirot to the drawing-room, where the guests had been gathered under Inspector Grayson's orders. The air was thick with tension, the earlier shock giving way to a palpable unease. Lady Beatrice sat by the fire, her delicate features composed, but her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Charles Langley, the solicitor, stood undiminished by the morning's events. Miss Clara Duval sat with young Emily, whispering softly to the girl, while Dr. Hartley hovered near the door, his medical bag still clutched as though it were a talisman. The butler, Reed, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, stood discreetly to one side, their faces masks of professional restraint. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hastings announced, "this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot, a detective of some renown. He has kindly agreed to assist in the investigation." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes scanning the room, with a calm intensity that made several of the guests shift uncomfortably. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth and precise. "I am here to uncover the truth behind the tragic death of Sir Reginald Pendleton. I assure you, I shall leave no detail unexamined, no question unasked. The truth, it is like a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, am most adept at assembling the pieces." Inspector Grayson, who had joined them, raised an eyebrow. "We appreciate the assistance, Mr. Poirot, but my men and I have the matter in hand. We've already begun questioning the household." Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course, Inspector. Your methods are thorough, I am sure. But permit me to observe in my own way. The mind, it sees what the eye may overlook." Grayson grunted, clearly skeptical but unwilling to argue. Poirot, undeterred, turned his attention to the guests. "I should like to begin by speaking with each of you in turn. But first, a visit to the scene of the crime, if you please." Hastings accompanied Poirot to the library, where the constables had cordoned off the area around Sir Reginald's body. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes darting from the dagger to the desk, the bookshelves, the windows, and the rug. He knelt beside the body, examining the dagger without touching it. "This weapon," he murmured. "It is from Sir Reginald's collection, no? I recall him speaking of his treasures last evening." Hastings nodded. "He showed us several artifacts during dinner. A jade figurine, a gold chalice, and that dagger. He said it was Persian, from the 16th century." "Précisément," Poirot said, his voice low. "And yet a collector does not leave such a treasure lying about. It was kept under lock and key, was it not?" "I believe so," Hastings replied. "There's a display case in the study, just off the library. It was locked when we saw it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then someone unlocked it." "All comes later." They returned to the drawing room, where Poirot began his interviews. He started with Lady Beatrice, who rose gracefully to meet him in a small anteroom for privacy. Her composure was remarkable, but Poirot noted the faint tremor in her voice as she spoke. "My husband was a good man," she said, her eyes fixed on a point beyond Poirot's shoulder. "He had no enemies that I knew of. We retired to bed shortly after 11 last night. I heard nothing unusual. And yet," Poirot said gently, "a man is dead, stabbed with a dagger from his own collection. Tell me, Lady Beatrice, who else had access to the study where this dagger was kept?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her handkerchief. "Only Reginald and I had keys to the display case. And Reed, of course, for cleaning purposes." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your movements last night, after retiring?" "I went to my room and stayed there," she said firmly. "I slept poorly, but I heard nothing until Mrs. Grayson's scream this morning." Poirot thanked her, and moved on to Charles Langley, whose nervous energy was evident in his rapid speech. "I was in my room by 10:30, he insisted. "I had some legal papers to review for Sir Reginald. I heard nothing, saw nothing. This is a terrible shock." "And the dagger?" Poirot asked. "You admired it last evening, I believe." Langley flushed. "Well, yes, it's a remarkable piece. But I had no reason to touch it, let alone use it. One by one, Poirot spoke with the others. Major Blake claimed to have been asleep by midnight, though he admitted to a late-night cigar on the terrace. Miss Duval repeated her story of hearing footsteps at 1 o'clock, but could not say whose they were. Dr. Hartley confirmed his estimate of the time of death, based on rigor mortis, and Reed and Mrs. Grayson both swore they had been in their quarters in the servants' wing. As the interviews concluded, Poirot stood by the window, gazing out at the gardens. "Hastings," he said softly, "this is a house of secrets. Each person tells me what they wish me to hear, but not what I need to know. The dagger, the clock, the footsteps, these are the threads we must follow." Hastings nodded, feeling the familiar thrill of a case unfolding. "What's next, Poirot?" "Next, mon ami, we observe. We listen. And we wait for the lies to unravel themselves." Word count 1980. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The drawing room of Pendleton Hall, with its high ceilings and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to close. Chair, his small frame radiating an almost palpable authority, surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. His notebook, a slim, leather-bound volume, lay open on his lap, and his silver pencil moved with deliberate precision as he recorded his observations. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "we are gathered to uncover the truth behind the murder of Sir Reginald Pendleton. I shall speak with each of you, and I ask for your complete candor. The smallest detail, it may seem insignificant to you, but to Hercule Poirot, it is a piece of the puzzle. Let us begin." He turned first to Lady Beatrice Pendleton, who sat with her hands folded, her emerald necklace catching the light from the chandelier. "Madame," Poirot said, "you have told me you retired to your room at 11 o'clock last night and heard nothing until the housekeeper's scream this morning. Yet you and Sir Reginald shared a suite, did you not? Is it possible you heard or saw something, a sound, a movement, that you have overlooked?" Lady Beatrice's lips tightened, and for a moment her composure wavered. "I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I heard nothing. Reginald often stayed up late in his study, working or reading. I was accustomed to retiring alone. Last night was no different." Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. "And the key to the display case, where the dagger was kept. You say only you, Sir Reginald, and the butler had access. Where was your key last night?" "In my jewelry box," she replied promptly. "I checked it this morning, and it was still there." "Vraiment?" Poirot said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "And you did not visit the study or the library after dinner?" "No," she said firmly, though her fingers tightened on her handkerchief. "I had no reason to." Poirot made a note, then turned to Charles Langley, the solicitor, whose nervous energy seemed to fill the room. "Monsieur Langley, you were reviewing papers for Sir Reginald last night. These papers, they were of a sensitive nature, perhaps?" Langley adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling slightly. "They were routine, Monsieur Poirot. A few contracts, some estate matters, nothing out of the ordinary." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward, "Sir Reginald was a man of wealth and influence. Such men often have secrets, debts, disputes, rivalries. You, as his solicitor, would know of these, no?" Langley's face reddened. "I handled his legal affairs, yes, but I assure you there was nothing untoward. Sir Reginald was meticulous about his finances." Poirot's pencil paused. "Meticulous, you say? Yet a man so meticulous is stabbed with his own dagger. Curious, is it not?" He did not wait for an answer, but turned to Major Blake, whose military posture was as rigid as ever. "Around 11:30, I'd say. I couldn't sleep, so I stepped out for a smoke. The terrace overlooks the gardens, and it was a clear night." "And you saw nothing?"
Heard nothing. Poirot's voice was soft, almost coaxing. Nothing, Blake said gruffly. The house was quiet. I was back in my room by midnight. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and moved on to Miss Clara Duval. The French governess met his gaze with a cool, almost defiant air. Mademoiselle, you mentioned hearing footsteps at 1 o'clock. Can you describe them? Quick, slow, heavy? Miss Duval tilted her head, considering. They were light, Monsieur Poirot, but deliberate. Not hurried, but not leisurely either. I thought perhaps it was one of the servants checking the house. And you did not investigate? Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing. No, she said, her voice steady. It is not my place to wander the house at night. Poirot made another note, then turned to Dr. Hartley. Doctor, your estimate of the time of death, midnight to 2 o'clock, is most precise. Yet you were not in the house at that hour. You dined with us, but you returned to your home in the village, did you not? Hartley nodded, his face somber. I left shortly after 10. Sir Reginald was in good spirits when I said good night. I returned this morning when Captain Hastings summoned me. And you noticed nothing unusual during dinner? Poirot pressed. Nothing, Hartley said. We discussed Sir Reginald's travels, his collection. It was a pleasant evening. Poirot's gaze lingered on the doctor for a moment before shifting to young Emily Thorne, who sat quietly beside Miss Duval. Mademoiselle Emily, you are young, but the young often see what others miss. Did you hear or see anything last night? Emily's eyes widened, and she glanced at Miss Duval before answering. I was asleep, sir. I didn't hear anything. Poirot smiled gently. Of course, ma petite. But if you remember anything, you will tell me, oui? Finally, he addressed the butler, Reed, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson. Monsieur Reed, you have a key to the display case. Where was it last night? In my quarters, sir, Reed said, his voice steady. Locked in a drawer, as always. And you, Madame Grayson? Poirot asked. You found the body this morning. The library door was ajar, you said. Was this unusual? Mrs. Grayson nodded, her hands twisting in her apron. Yes, sir. The library is always locked at night. I assumed Sir Reginald had left it open. But now... Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. Merci, everyone. You have been most helpful. I shall now reflect on what I have heard. Inspector Grayson, may I have access to the library and study once more? Grayson, who had been watching the proceedings with a mix of curiosity and impatience, nodded. Very well, Mr. Poirot, but my men are conducting their own
investigation. Don't interfere. I do not interfere, Inspector, Poirot said with a slight bow. I illuminate. As the guests dispersed, Hastings followed Poirot back to the library. The detective moved with purpose, examining the room with renewed intensity. He paused at the desk, where the brass clock still showed 1:17. This clock, he said, it is stopped, yet it is wound. Someone stopped it deliberately, Hastings. Why? To mark the time of the murder? Hastings ventured. Perhaps, Poirot said, but why mark it so obviously? No, there is more here. He moved to the study, where the display case stood, its glass door now open, the velvet lining empty where the dagger had once rested. Poirot examined the lock, his fingers tracing its edges. No signs of forcing. The key was used, or the lock was picked by an expert. He turned to the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines. Sir Reginald was a man of order. Yet look, here, a book is out of place. The history of Persian artifacts, slightly askew, and here, he pulled the book out, revealing a faint smudge of ink on the shelf, a mark that was not made by dust. Hastings leaned closer. Ink? From the desk? Précisément, Poirot said. Someone touched the inkwell, perhaps in haste, and then this book. We must ask ourselves, why this book? And why at such an hour? As they returned to the drawing room, Poirot's expression was one of quiet satisfaction. Hastings, my friend, the threads are beginning to form a pattern. The dagger, the clock,
the footsteps, the ink. Each is a clue, but none tells the whole story. We must listen to the silences, the things not said. Hastings nodded, though he felt a familiar frustration at Poirot's cryptic manner. "What's your next step, Poirot?" "To watch, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The guilty one. They will betray themselves." "They always do." Word count, 1,980. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Pendleton Hall, casting a muted glow over the drawing room, where the guests remained under the watchful eye of Inspector Grayson's constables. The atmosphere was one of strained civility, with whispered conversations and sidelong glances betraying the unease that simmered beneath the surface. Captain Hastings stood by the window, observing the group, while Hercule Poirot sat in his chosen chair, his small frame exuding a quiet authority that seemed to command the room. His notebook lay open, and his silver pencil moved with deliberate precision, recording not only words, but the subtleties of gesture and expression that he deemed equally telling. Inspector Grayson, bustling with the
Inquiries suggest that Mr. Charles Langley, the solicitor, had a particular interest in it during last night's dinner. Several witnesses confirm he lingered over the display case, commenting on its value. Langley's face flushed a deep crimson, and he rose from his seat, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "That's preposterous," he sputtered. "I admired the dagger, yes, as anyone might. It's a rare piece, a collector's item, but to suggest I'd use it to murder Sir Reginald is absurd." Grayson held up a hand. "Calm yourself, Mr. Langley. We're simply following the evidence. You were seen near the study after dinner, and you had access to Sir Reginald's papers, which may have contained sensitive information. Perhaps a dispute over finances." Langley's hands clenched into fists. "I was in my room by 10:30, as I told you. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. He was my client, my friend." Poirot, who had been listening with an air of detached interest, raised a finger. "If I may, Inspector," he said, his voice smooth as polished glass. "Monsieur Langley's interest in the dagger is noted, but let us not be too hasty. The obvious suspect is often the least likely. Tell me, Monsieur Langley, these papers you reviewed last night, what was their nature?" Langley hesitated, his eyes darting to Lady Beatrice before answering. "They were estate documents, as I said, a new will, some investment agreements, nothing that would warrant this." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A new will, you say? And who stood to benefit from this new arrangement?" Langley's flush deepened. "That's confidential, Monsieur Poirot. I can't discuss it without violating my professional duty." "Very well," Poirot said, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. "We shall return to this later." He turned to Grayson. "Inspector, have your men examined the study for fingerprints on the display case?" Grayson nodded. "We have. Only Sir Reginald's and the butler's prints were found, as expected, since Reed cleans the case regularly." "Expected, oui," Poirot murmured, "but not conclusive." He made a note, then shifted his attention to Major Blake, who had been pacing near the fireplace. "Major, you were on the terrace at 11:30, smoking a cigar. Did you see anyone near the study windows, which open onto the terrace?" Blake stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "No, I saw nothing. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. I was alone, enjoying the quiet." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward, "the study is adjacent to the library, where the murder occurred. A man of your military experience, Major, would surely notice any unusual movement, even in the dark." Blake's eyes narrowed. "I'm not in the habit of spying on my hosts, Mr. Poirot. I told you, I saw nothing." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Miss Clara Duval. The governess sat with young Emily, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a calm intensity. "Mademoiselle Duval, your story of footsteps at 1 o'clock intrigues me. You are certain of the time?" "Yes," she replied, her French accent lending a musical quality to her words. I glanced at my bedside clock. It was precisely 1. "And these footsteps," Poirot continued, "they were light, you said. Could they have been those of a woman?" Miss Duval hesitated, her fingers brushing Emily's hair. "Perhaps, but I cannot say for certain. The corridor was dark, and I did not look out." Poirot's pencil paused. "You are observant, mademoiselle, yet you chose not to investigate. Why?" "I am a governess, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady. "My duty is to Emily, not to the comings and goings of the household." Poirot smiled faintly. "A commendable dedication." He then addressed young Emily, his tone softening. "Ma petite, you have been very quiet. Did you perhaps hear these footsteps as well?" Emily's eyes widened, and she clutched Miss Duval's hand. I don't know, sir. I was asleep, I think." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the girl for a moment before moving to Dr. Hartley. "Doctor, you left the house at 10 o'clock. Did you notice anything unusual as you departed? A car in the drive, perhaps, or a light in the study?" Hartley shook his head. "Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. The house was quiet, and I drove straight home." Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. "Merci, everyone. You have given me much to consider." He rose, his movements precise, and gestured to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, let us revisit the scene of the crime." As they walked to the library, Hastings could sense Poirot's mind at work, piecing together the fragments of information. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" he asked. "Langley seems the obvious suspect. But you don't believe it, do you?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The obvious, Hastings, is a trap for the unwary. Langley's interest in the dagger is too convenient, too neatly presented. No, the truth lies elsewhere. Consider the stopped clock at 1:17, the ink smudge on the bookshelf, the footsteps at 1 o'clock. These are not accidents. They are deliberate, meant to mislead." In the library, Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, examining the desk once more. He picked up a small blotting paper, holding it to the light. "See here, Hastings, a faint impression of writing. It is reversed, of course, but it appears to be a signature, Sir Reginald's, perhaps, or another's." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Can you make it out?" "Not yet," Poirot said. "But it is significant."
Coincidence that it relates to the dagger. He moved to the display case in the study, examining the lock once more. No scratches, no signs of tampering. The key was used, or the lock was picked by one with great skill. We must ask Reed about the key's exact location. As they returned to the drawing room, Inspector Grayson approached, his face grim. "We found something, Mr. Poirot. In Langley's room, a handkerchief with a spot of blood on it." Langley, overhearing, leapt to his feet. "That's impossible! I've never seen such a thing!" Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourself, Monsieur Langley. Inspector, may I see this handkerchief?" Grayson produced it, wrapped in a cloth. Poirot examined it carefully, noting the monogram CL and the small, dark stain. "This blood," he said, "it is fresh, yes?" Grayson nodded. "Appears so. We'll have it tested, but it's damning evidence." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Damning, perhaps, but not conclusive. Blood can be placed as easily as it is spilled." He handed the handkerchief back. "We must proceed with care, Inspector. The net of lies is tightening, but the fish we seek is clever." As the guests dispersed for luncheon, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, we are surrounded by red herrings. The handkerchief, the dagger, Langley's interest, these are distractions. The true clue lies in the details. The clock, the ink, the clock, the ink, the book. We must follow them, and soon the truth will emerge." Hastings nodded, feeling the familiar thrill of Poirot's method. The case was growing more complex, but he trusted his friend to unravel it, thread by thread. Word count 1,980. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Pendleton Hall, bathing the library in a golden glow that seemed at odds with the grim task at hand. Hercule Poirot stood by the oak desk where Sir Reginald Pendleton's body had been removed, his small frame a study in concentration. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, watched as Poirot's keen eyes darted from the stopped brass clock to the ink-stained blotting paper, then to the bookshelf where the misplaced volume on Persian artifacts still sat askew. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and the lingering tension of a house in mourning, yet Poirot's demeanor remained as precise and unruffled as his immaculate mustache. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and thoughtful, "we are at the heart of the matter now. The clues, they speak to us, but we must listen with care." The clock stopped at 1:17. The ink smudge, the book, these are not accidents. They are signposts, pointing to the truth. Hastings nodded, though he felt the familiar pang of frustration at Poirot's
Mislead would not leave such a blatant marker. No. The clock tells us something else, something subtle. He picked up the blotting paper, holding it to the light once more. And this, see the faint impression of a signature. It is not Sir Reginald's, I think. The flourish, it is too delicate, too precise. Hastings peered at the paper, squinting to make out the ghostly outline. Could it be Langley's? He was handling papers last night. Possibly, Poirot said, but we must not assume. Assumptions, they are the enemy of truth. He set the paper down and moved to the bookshelf, pulling out the volume on Persian artifacts. He opened it, flipping through the pages with care, then paused. Regardez, Hastings, a page is marked. A passage about a 16th-century Persian dagger, identical to the one used in the murder. Hastings leaned closer. A coincidence, surely. Poirot's mustache twitched. Coincidence, mon ami, is a word I do not trust. This book was touched for a reason. Someone sought knowledge, or perhaps confirmation about the dagger. He closed the book and returned it to the shelf, his fingers brushing the ink smudge. And this ink, it matches the crystal inkwell on the desk. Someone wrote something, then touched this shelf in haste. They were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, who entered the library with a purposeful stride. "Mr. Poirot," he said, "we've questioned the staff further. The butler Reed confirms his key to the display case was in his drawer, untouched. But we found something else, a scrap of paper in the study fireplace, partially burned. It appears to be a fragment of a letter, addressed to Sir Reginald." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Show me, if you please." Grayson produced a small evidence bag containing a charred piece of paper. Poirot examined it through the plastic, noting the elegant handwriting and the words, "regret to inform," and "urgent matter." The rest was too damaged to read. "This letter," Poirot said, "it was burned deliberately. But why? To conceal its contents or to draw attention to them?" Grayson frowned. "You think it's significant?" "Everything is significant, Inspector," Poirot replied, handing back the bag. "We must reconstruct what we can of this letter. It may hold the key to motive." As Grayson left to continue his inquiries, Poirot turned his attention to the display case in the adjacent study. The glass door, now dusted for fingerprints, showed only the expected marks of Sir Reginald and Reed. Poirot examined the lock again, his fingers tracing its edges. "No tampering, as you said, Hastings. The key was used, or the lock was picked with great skill. We must speak to Reed again." They found the butler in the servants' quarters, polishing silver with a mechanical precision that belied the day's events. Reed looked up as they approached. "Hastings, how may I assist you?" "Monsieur Reed," Poirot said. his tone courteous but firm. "Your key to the display case. Describe its hiding place, if you please." Reed hesitated, then nodded. "It's kept in a locked drawer in my pantry, sir. Only I have the key to the drawer, and it was there this morning when I checked." "And you are certain no one could have taken it?" Poirot pressed. Reed's eyes flickered. "I cannot be certain, sir. The pantry is private, but I was busy last night, serving dinner and clearing up. Someone could have slipped in." Poirot made a note. "And the library door, which Madame Grayson found ajar, was it locked when you retired last night?" "Yes, sir," Reed said. "I locked it myself at 10 o'clock, as is my custom." Poirot thanked him and led Hastings back to the drawing room, where the guests were gathered for tea, their faces a study in strained politeness. Lady Beatrice sipped her tea with delicate precision, while Langley fidgeted with his cup, his eyes darting to the door. Major Blake sat stiffly, his hands folded, and Miss Duval murmured to Emily, who clutched a small doll with a vacant expression. Dr. Hartley, having returned from assisting the police, sat quietly, his medical bag at his feet. Poirot addressed the group. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have a question. The book on Persian artifacts in the library, was it consulted by anyone last night?" A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Langley spoke first. "I glanced at it during the tour, yes. Sir Reginald was proud of his collection, and I was curious about the dagger's history." "Curious," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. "And did you touch it after dinner?" "No," Langley said quickly, then paused. "Well, perhaps I did, briefly. I can't recall exactly." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You cannot recall, or you choose not to?" Langley flushed. "I didn't touch it after dinner, I'm sure of it." Poirot turned to Miss Duval. "Mademoiselle, you are educated, no? Have you an interest in Persian artifacts?" Miss Duval's lips curved into a faint smile. "I am a governess, Monsieur Poirot, not an antiquarian. My interests lie with my pupil, not with books of history." "And yet," Poirot said, "someone touched that book, leaving an ink smudge, someone who wrote something at the desk, perhaps in haste." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group. Lady Beatrice set down her teacup with a faint clink. "Are you suggesting one of us was in the library last night?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes wary. "I suggest nothing, madame," Poirot said. "I observe, and I note that the truth, it hides in the details. The clock, the ink, the book, the burned letter. These are the threads of the net in which the guilty one is caught. As the guests multiply, but the true clue emerges. The book, the ink, the stopped clock, they point to a mind that planned this crime with care, yet made a mistake. We must find that mistake." Hastings nodded, his mind racing. "What's next, Poirot?" "We watch, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The guilty one grows nervous. They will act, and when they do, we shall be ready." Word count 1980. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The evening at Pendleton Hall settled over the estate like a heavy fog, the grand rooms dimmed by the weight of suspicion and grief. The drawing room, where the guests had gathered after a somber dinner, was lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, casting flickering shadows on the ornate wallpaper. Hercule Poirot sat in his customary chair, his small frame radiating a quiet intensity that seemed to draw the attention of everyone present. Captain Hastings stood near the hearth, his eyes scanning the group, noting the subtle shifts in posture and expression that betrayed their unease. The air was thick with unspoken questions, and the faint clink of teacups only underscored the tension. Poirot's notebook lay open, his silver pencil poised as he addressed the assembled company. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice as precise as a metronome, "we have reached a point in our investigation where the threads of truth begin to unravel the fabric of deceit. Each of you has a story,
But not all stories are true. Tonight, we shall explore the motives that lie beneath your words. Inspector Grayson, standing by the door with a constable, shifted impatiently. Mr. Poirot, we've been over their statements. Langley's handkerchief, the dagger, the locked case, everything points to a clear suspect. Poirot raised a finger, his eyes gleaming. Clarity, Inspector, is often an illusion. The handkerchief, it is too convenient, the dagger, too obvious. No, the truth lies in what is hidden, secrets of the heart, of money, of betrayal. He turned to Lady Beatrice, whose delicate hands were folded tightly in her lap. Madame, you have spoken of your husband's good character, yet a man of wealth and influence always has enemies. Tell me, was there discord in your marriage? Lady Beatrice's eyes widened, a flush rising to her cheeks. Monsieur Poirot, that is a private matter. Reginald and I were devoted to each other. Devotion, Poirot said softly, does not preclude secrets. There are rumors, madame, of financial strain. Sir Reginald's investments, they were not always successful, no? Her lips parted, but no sound came. After a moment, she said, Reginald managed our finances. I trusted him implicitly. Poirot made a note, then
Glinted as he adjusted them. I can confirm that Lady Beatrice was the primary beneficiary, as is customary. There were also provisions for Emily, his ward, and a few charitable bequests. And you, monsieur? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Did you benefit? Langley's face reddened. A small bequest, yes, for my years of service, but nothing to warrant murder. Poirot's gaze shifted to Major Blake, whose military bearing seemed to stiffen under scrutiny. Major, you and Sir Reginald were old friends, yet friendships can sour. Was there a disagreement, perhaps over money or honor? Blake's jaw tightened. We had our differences, yes, but nothing serious. Reginald lent me a sum some years ago, which I've been repaying. He never pressed me for it. A loan, Poirot mused, can be a chain that binds. How large was this sum? Blake hesitated, then said gruffly, £5,000. A gentleman's agreement, nothing more. Poirot's pencil moved swiftly, and he turned to Miss Clara Duval, whose dark eyes met his with a calm defiance. Mademoiselle, you are devoted to young Emily, yet your position here is precarious. Sir Reginald, he was fond of you. Or perhaps too fond. Miss Duval's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. You suggest an impropriety, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald was kind, but our interactions were professional. My concern is for Emily, nothing more. And yet, Poirot said, you heard footsteps at 1 o'clock. A governess, awake at such an hour, is unusual, no? I am a light sleeper, she replied evenly. Emily sometimes has nightmares. I was alert to her needs. Poirot nodded, then addressed Dr. Hartley. Doctor, you dine with Sir Reginald often. Did he ever speak of threats, of enemies? Hartley shook his head. He was a private man, Monsieur Poirot. He spoke of his travels, his collection, but never of enemies. Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. Merci, everyone. You have given me much to consider. He rose, gesturing to Hastings. Come, mon ami, let us walk. Outside, the gardens were cloaked in twilight, the air cool and scented with damp earth. Poirot's pace was slow, deliberate, his walking stick tapping the gravel path. Hastings, he said, the lies, they multiply. A new will, a loan, a marriage not as harmonious as it seems. These are the threads of motive. Hastings frowned. Langley's bequest and Blake's debt seem the strongest motives so far. And that handkerchief, Grayson's convinced it's damning. Too damning, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. The handkerchief,
It is placed to mislead. But the book, the ink, the stopped clock, finding another small piece, barely legible. Regardez, Hastings. Another word. Debt. This letter, it spoke of money, perhaps a demand. A blackmail letter, Hastings suggested. Perhaps, Poirot said, or a warning. We must speak to the servants again. They see what the guests do not. They found Mrs. Grayson in the kitchen, preparing tea for the staff. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a tray. Monsieur Poirot, she said, this is a terrible business. Sir Reginald was a good master, for all his faults. Faults? Poirot asked, his tone gentle. What faults, madame? Mrs. Grayson hesitated, glancing at the door. He could be harsh, sir, with the staff, sometimes with Lady Beatrice. And he was worried about money. I heard him say so to Mr. Langley. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you see anyone near the study or library last night? She shook her head. No, sir. I was in my room by 10, asleep by 11. Poirot thanked her and sought out Reed, who was polishing the silver in the pantry. Monsieur Reed, you locked the library at 10. Did you notice anything unusual in the study? Papers out of place, perhaps? Reed's face remained impassive. Everything was in order, sir. Sir Reginald was at his desk when I locked up. And the key to the display case? Poirot pressed. In my drawer, as I said, Reed replied. I checked it before bed. Poirot nodded, then led Hastings back to the drawing room. Mon ami, he said, the net tightens. A debt, a will, a marriage under strain. These are not mere details. They are the heart of the crime. But we need one more piece, the mistake the murderer made. As they re-entered the drawing room, Poirot's gaze fell on young Emily, who sat alone, clutching her doll. He approached her, his voice soft. Ma petite, you are observant, I think. Did you see anything last night? Anything at all? Emily's eyes darted to Miss Duval, then back to Poirot. I saw a light, she whispered, under the study door when I got up to get water. It was late. Poirot's moustache twitched. A light, you say? At what time? After midnight, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't tell anyone. I was scared. Poirot patted her hand. You have done well, ma petite. This light, it is most important. As they stepped away, Hastings whispered, a light in the study. That means someone was there after Reed locked up. Précisément, Poirot said. The lies are unraveling, Hastings. Soon we shall see the truth. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The dining room of Pendleton Hall, with its long mahogany table and crystal. Ongoing investigation. Hercule Poirot, seated at one end of the table, observed the group with his characteristic calm, his green eyes catching every glance, every tremor. Captain Hastings, positioned across from him, noted the tension that hung over the meal like a storm cloud, the clink of cutlery sounding unnaturally loud in the absence of conversation. Poirot had been unusually quiet throughout the day, his notebook filled with cryptic jottings as he pieced together the clues, the stopped clock at 1:17, the ink smudge on the bookshelf, the misplaced book on Persian artifacts, the burned letter fragment, and now young Emily's revelation of a light in the study after midnight. Hastings knew his friend was building a mental map of the crime, but the shape of it remained elusive. The guests, too, seemed on edge, their earlier composure fraying under Poirot's relentless scrutiny and Inspector Grayson's dogged pursuit of Charles Langley as the prime suspect. As the soup course was cleared, Poirot set down his spoon with a deliberate clink and addressed the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. We have dined together, yet the air is heavy with secrets. Tonight I ask you to consider the heart of this crime. Not merely the act, but the passion that drove it. Someone in this room knows more than they have admitted. I invite them to speak now, before the net of truth closes entirely. A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Beatrice, her emerald necklace glinting, raised her chin. Monsieur Poirot, this is intolerable. You accuse us all without evidence, casting suspicion like a fisherman's net. Not accusation, madame, Poirot replied, his tone gentle but firm. Observation. The truth, it is like a delicate flower. It requires light to bloom. Let us shed light together. Before anyone could respond, Miss Clara Duval set down her glass with a trembling hand. Her face, usually composed, was pale, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. Enough, she said, her voice breaking. I cannot bear this any longer. Monsieur Poirot, you seek the truth, and I must speak. The room fell silent, every eye turning to the governess. Hastings leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed with anticipation. Mademoiselle, he said, what is it you wish to say? Miss Duval took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I lied about the footsteps I heard at 1 o'clock. They were not in the corridor. They were in the study. I was passing by on my way to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard them, and voices, low, angry voices. I couldn't make out the words, but one was Sir Reginald's, I'm certain. A gasp escaped Lady Beatrice, and Langley's spoon clattered against his plate. Major Blake's gaze fixed on her governess. Why did you not tell us this before, mademoiselle? Poirot asked, his voice soft but probing. Miss Duval's lips trembled. I was afraid. Sir Reginald was a powerful man, and I am only a governess. If I spoke of what I heard, I feared I would be dismissed, or worse. But after Emily mentioned the light in the study, I could no longer stay silent. It is too much to carry. Poirot nodded, his pencil moving swiftly across his notebook. And these voices, mademoiselle, could you identify the other? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, it was too muffled. But it was a man's voice, I think. They were arguing, and then silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. Inspector Grayson, who had been hovering near the door, stepped forward. This changes things, Miss Duval. If Sir Reginald was arguing with someone in the study, it narrows the timeline. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I told you, she said, her voice rising. I was afraid. I have no family, no security. My position here is all I have. Poirot raised a hand, silencing Grayson. Mademoiselle, your courage does you credit. But tell me, this light Emily saw, did you see it as well? Miss Duval hesitated, then nodded. Yes, through the crack under the door. It was faint, like a single lamp. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, mademoiselle. You have illuminated much. He turned to the others, his gaze sweeping the room. This new information, it shifts the puzzle. A light in the study, an argument, footsteps, all after midnight. Someone was with Sir Reginald, and that someone holds the key to his death. Major Blake slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. This is nonsense. You're accusing us all based on a governess's fears and a child's imagination. I was in my room, as I've said. Calm yourself, Major, Poirot said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. The truth does not yield to anger. It yields to logic. Langley, his face pale, spoke up. If there was an argument, it wasn't with me. I was in my room, working on those blasted papers. And yet, Poirot said, your handkerchief, with its stain of blood, suggests otherwise. Or perhaps it was placed to mislead. Langley's eyes widened. Placed? You think someone framed me? I think many things, monsieur, Poirot said, but I know nothing until the evidence speaks. Lady Beatrice rose, her composure fraying. This is unbearable. My husband is dead, and you torment us with questions and insinuations, lingered in its walls.
Poirot stood by the desk, his fingers brushing the stopped clock.
Hastings, he said, Miss Duval's confession is the crack in the dam. The lies are breaking, and the truth will soon flood through. Hastings frowned. Do you believe her? About the voices? I believe she heard something, Poirot said, but whether it is the whole truth, I am not certain. Her fear, it is genuine, but fear can obscure as much as it reveals. The light, the voices, the stopped clock, these are pieces of a delicate machine. We must find the gear that binds them. He moved to the bookshelf, examining the ink smudge again. This ink, he said, it is from the desk, but the signature on the blotting paper, it is not Sir Reginald's. I have compared it to his papers. It is another's, written in haste, perhaps during the argument, Miss Duval heard. Hastings's eyes widened. You think the murderer wrote something? A note, perhaps? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps it was Sir Reginald, writing before his death. We must find the original of this signature. They were interrupted by Reed, who entered with a tray of coffee. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice steady, I overheard Miss Duval's confession. I feel I must speak. Last night, as I locked the library, I saw a shadow move in the study. I thought it was Sir Reginald, but now I'm not sure. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A shadow, Monsieur Reed. At what time? Just before 10, Reed said. I didn't think it significant at the time. Poirot made a note. Everything is significant, monsieur. Merci. As Reed left, Hastings whispered, A shadow at 10, voices at 1, a light after midnight. This timeline is a mess, Poirot. Not a mess, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice calm. A tapestry, woven with care. The murderer planned this crime, but they could not plan for every detail. We are close, Hastings, very close. Chapter 9. The Trap. The morning of the third day at Pendleton Hall dawned gray and heavy. The sky outside the tall windows of the drawing room cloaked in clouds that mirrored the oppressive atmosphere within. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit, stood before the assembled guests, his silver-tipped walking stick planted firmly on the polished floor. His green eyes, sharp and unrelenting, swept over the group, each of whom sat in varying states of unease. Captain Hastings, positioned near the fireplace, felt the tension in the room like a taut wire, ready to snap. Poirot had been quieter than usual that morning, his notebook filled with meticulous notes, and Hastings knew his friend was preparing to spring a trap. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. We have reached a critical juncture in the investigation of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder. The clues, the stopped clock, the ink smudge, the misplaced book, the burned letter, the voices in the study, have woven a net, and now we shall draw it tight. Today I shall reveal not the solution, but the questions that will lead us to it. I ask you to listen carefully, for the guilty one among you will feel the pressure of truth. Inspector Grayson, standing by the door with his constable, crossed his arms, his skepticism evident. Mr. Poirot, we've been over the evidence. Langley's handkerchief, his interest in the dagger, it's enough to make an arrest. Poirot raised a finger, his mustache twitching. Patience, Inspector. Evidence. It can be planted, manipulated. The truth, it requires the mind to see beyond the obvious. Let us begin.
He turned to the group, his gaze settling on Lady Beatrice, whose delicate hands clutched a lace handkerchief. "Madame, you have maintained that your marriage was harmonious, yet whispers of financial strain and discord have reached my ears. Did Sir Reginald confide in you about a debt, perhaps one that threatened his fortune?" Lady Beatrice's lips parted, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Monsieur Poirot, I have told you, Reginald managed our finances. If there were debts, he did not share them with me." "And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft but probing, "the burned letter fragment spoke of a debt. Was it a debt of money or of honor? And to whom?" Her face paled, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to Charles Langley, whose nervous fidgeting had intensified. "Monsieur Langley, you prepared a new will. You claim it was routine, yet Sir Reginald was murdered shortly after. Was there a change in the will that someone wished to prevent?" Langley's spectacles slipped down his nose. "I've told you, it was standard. Lady Beatrice and Emily were the main beneficiaries. There was no reason for murder."
"Framed," Langley exclaimed, his voice rising. "Someone placed it there to incriminate me." Poirot nodded, as if considering this, then turned to Major Blake. "Major, your debt to Sir Reginald, £5,000, a significant sum. Was it a source of tension between you?" Blake's jaw tightened, his military bearing rigid. "It was a gentleman's agreement, as I said. Reginald never pressed me for repayment. We were friends." "Friends," Poirot repeated. "Yet friends can betray. Did you argue with him that night, perhaps in the study?" "I was on the terrace, smoking," Blake snapped. "I've told you that." Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Clara Duval, whose confession the previous evening had shifted the investigation. "Mademoiselle, you heard voices in the study at 1 o'clock, an argument. You claim not to know the second voice, yet your hesitation suggests otherwise. Was it someone you recognized?" Miss Duval's dark eyes met his, steady but guarded. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, it was muffled. I couldn't be certain." "And the light young Emily saw," Poirot pressed. "You confirmed it. Yet you did not mention it until pressed. Why?" "I was protecting Emily," she said, her voice low. "She's a child, and this is a nightmare for her." Poirot turned to Dr. Hartley, who sat with his medical bag at his feet. "Doctor, you left at 10, yet you dined often with Sir Reginald. Did he ever speak of a rival, a threat, perhaps tied to his collection?" Hartley shook his head. "He was proud of his artifacts, nothing more. He never mentioned threats." Poirot closed his notebook with a snap, his expression inscrutable. "Merci, everyone. Now I propose a small experiment. I have asked Inspector Grayson to gather you here this afternoon, in the library, where Sir Reginald met his end. There we shall recreate the scene as it was that night. Each of you will take your place, and we shall see what the truth reveals." A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Lady Beatrice's hand tightened on her handkerchief, Langley's face grew paler, and Blake's eyes narrowed. Miss Duval clutched Emily's hand, while Hartley remained impassive. Grayson, though skeptical, nodded. "Very well, Mr. Poirot. We'll humor you. But I expect results." "C'est bien," Poirot said, his voice calm. "Results, Inspector, are precisely what I intend to deliver." That afternoon the library was prepared, the constables clearing the space but preserving the key elements. The desk, the stopped clock, the bookshelf with its misplaced book. The guests were positioned as they claimed to have been at various times that night. Lady Beatrice in her room, Langley at his desk, Blake on the terrace, Miss Duval and Emily in their... Let us imagine the night of the murder. At 10, Monsieur Reed locks the library and sees a shadow in the study. At 11:30, Major Blake is on the terrace smoking. At 1,
Mademoiselle Duval hears voices and sees a light under the study door. And at 1:17, the clock stops. Let us test these accounts. He moved to the study door, which connected to the library, and opened it. Mademoiselle Duval, you are in the corridor. Show me where you stood when you heard the voices. Miss Duval, her face pale, stepped forward and positioned herself near the door. Here, she said, her voice trembling. I was passing by. Poirot nodded, then turned to Blake. Major, you are on the terrace. The study windows are here. He gestured to the tall windows, their curtains drawn back. You saw nothing, you say? Nothing, Blake confirmed, his voice gruff. Poirot moved to the desk, picking up the blotting paper. And here, someone wrote something, leaving an ink smudge on the bookshelf. Monsieur Langley, you touched the book on Persian artifacts. Why? Langley stammered. I told you, I was curious. I didn't touch it after dinner. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet the ink suggests otherwise. And the clock stopped at 1:17. Was it you who stopped it, or another? The room grew silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing on each guest. Suddenly, Emily, who had been standing quietly, let out a small sob. I saw something else, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The shadow. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a person in the study, holding something shiny. Poirot knelt before her, his voice gentle. Ma petite, this is most important. What did you see? Describe it. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It was dark, but I saw someone by the desk, holding something. Maybe the dagger. I was scared, so I ran back to my room. The room erupted in gasps. Miss Duval clutched Emily, her face ashen. Why didn't you tell me, child? I was afraid, Emily said, her voice trembling. Poirot rose, his expression triumphant. The trap. It has sprung. A shadow, a light, a shiny object. The pieces align. The guilty one. They are among us, and their mask is slipping. Hastings, watching the scene, felt a thrill of anticipation. Poirot was closing in, and the truth was near. 1980. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The library of Pendleton Hall was steeped in a hushed solemnity as the afternoon light waned, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where Sir Reginald Pendleton had met his end. Hercule Poirot stood at anticipation. He knew this moment. Poirot's dramatic unveiling of the truth, where every clue, every contradiction would be woven into a tapestry of logic that revealed the murderer. Inspector Grayson, stationed by the door with his constable, shifted impatiently, his skepticism barely concealed. Mr. Poirot, he said, you've had your theatrics. Let's have the truth now. We've got Langley's handkerchief, his interest in the dagger, and now this talk of shadows and voices. It's time to make an arrest. Poirot raised a hand, his moustache twitching with a faint smile. Patience, Inspector. The truth. It is not a blunt instrument to be wielded hastily. It is a delicate mechanism, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall now set it in motion. Mesdames et messieurs, prepare yourselves, for the net of lies is about to be torn apart. He paced slowly before the desk, his silver-tipped walking stick tapping the floor with measured precision. Let us begin with the facts. Sir Reginald Pendleton was stabbed in this library with a 16th-century Persian dagger from his own collection, between midnight and 2 o'clock. The clock on the desk was stopped at 1:17. An ink smudge was found on a bookshelf. A book on Persian artifacts was misplaced. A burned letter fragment spoke of a debt.
and a light was seen in the study after midnight. These are the threads of our puzzle." He turned to the group, his gaze piercing. "But there are other threads, motives hidden in secrets. A new will, a debt, a strained marriage, a governess's fear, a child's observation. Each of you has played a part in this drama, but only one of you is the murderer." Lady Beatrice's hand tightened on her handkerchief, her face pale but composed. Langley's spectacles glinted as he fidgeted, his eyes darting to the door. Major Blake stood rigid, his jaw set, while Miss Duval held Emily's hand, her expression guarded. Dr. Hartley's face was impassive, his medical bag at his feet, and Reed and Mrs. Grayson stood silently, their faces etched with strain. Poirot began with the clock. The clock, stopped at 1:17, was meant to suggest the time of death. But why stop it so precisely? A murderer does not pause to tamper with clocks unless it serves a purpose. I propose it was a distraction, to fix our attention on 1:17, when the true time of death may differ. He moved to the bookshelf, touching the misplaced book. This book on Persian artifacts, marked at a page describing the dagger, was touched by someone with ink on their fingers. The ink matches the crystal inkwell on the dead. Voices in the study at 1 o'clock. An argument. You claimed not to recognize the second voice, but your hesitation betrayed you. You know more than you have said. Miss Duval's lips parted, but she remained silent, her eyes flickering with fear. Poirot continued, turning to Emily. "Ma petite, your courage has illuminated much. A shadow in the study, holding something shiny, perhaps the dagger. This was after midnight, confirming a presence when all claimed to be asleep." He pivoted to Langley. "Monsieur Langley, your handkerchief, stained with blood, was found in your room. Too convenient, no? And your interest in the dagger, your access to the will, these make you an easy suspect." "But I believe you were framed," Langley gasped, relief and fear mingling in his expression. "Framed? But who?" Poirot raised a finger. "Patience. Let us consider the sequence. At 10, Reed locks the library and sees a shadow in the study. At 11:30, Major Blake is on the terrace. At 1, Miss Duval hears voices and sees a light. After midnight, Emily sees a shadow with a shiny object. And at 1:17, the clock stops. But the key to the display case, where the dagger was kept, shows no signs of tampering. It was opened with a key. Lady Beatrice's, Sir Reginald's, or Reed's. He turned to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, you claim your key was in your jewellery box, yet you did not check it until morning. Was it truly there all night?" Her face flushed. I assume so. I had no reason to check." Poirot nodded, then addressed Reed. "Monsieur Reed, your key was in your drawer, but you were busy serving dinner. Could someone have taken it?" Reed's face tightened. "It's possible, sir. I was distracted." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Now, let us weave these threads. The murderer planned this crime with care. They took the dagger, using a key to avoid suspicion. They argued with Sir Reginald in the study, where a letter was written and partially burned. They moved to the library, where the murder occurred, and stopped the clock to mislead us. But they made a mistake. The ink smudge, the misplaced book, the signature on the blotting paper." He paused, his gaze settling on Dr. Hartley. "Doctor, you have been quiet. Yet you dined often with Sir Reginald. You knew his habits, his collection. You left at 10, but did you return?" Hartley's face remained impassive. "I did not, Monsieur Poirot. I was home, as I said. And yet," Poirot said, his voice like steel, "the signature on the blotting paper matches your hand. I compared it to a prescription you wrote for Mrs. Grayson. You were in the study, writing a letter. A demand for repayment of a debt Sir Reginald owed you. Perhaps for services rendered beyond medicine. Hartley's eyes widened. You took the dagger, knowing its value, and stabbed him in the library. You stopped the clock to suggest a later time, burned the letter to hide your motive, and placed the handkerchief in Langley's room to divert suspicion. But you could not erase the ink smudge, the misplaced book, or Emily's observation of your shadow. The room erupted in gasps. Hartley rose, his face pale. "This is madness! You have no proof!" Poirot held up the blotting paper. "This is proof, Doctor. And the letter fragment found in the fireplace bears your initials in the corner, S.H. You underestimated the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot." Grayson stepped forward, his face grim. "Dr. Hartley, you'll come with us." Hartley's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "He owed me everything," he muttered. "Years of unpaid debts, promises broken. I only wanted what was mine." As the constables led him away, the room fell silent. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression somber. "The heart, mon ami. It drives men to terrible acts. But the truth, it always prevails." Word count, the reflection. The drawing room of Pendleton Hall was cloaked in the soft glow of lamplight as the evening settled over the estate, the tumult of Dr. Hartley's arrest still lingering in the air. The guests, now diminished by one, sat in a subdued circle, their faces marked by a mixture of relief and disquiet. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit unrumpled despite the day's exertions, stood by the fireplace, his silver-tipped walking stick resting against a chair. His green eyes, usually so piercing, held a quieter intensity now, as though the resolution of the case had brought not triumph, but a moment of introspection. Captain Hastings, seated near the window, watched his friend with a familiar admiration, tempered by the somber weight of the truth they had uncovered. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was measured and deliberate, carrying the cadence of a man who had seen too many tragedies to revel in victory. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, addressing the remaining guests, Lady Beatrice, Charles Langley, Major Blake, Miss Clara Duval, young Emily Thorne, and the servants, Reed and Mrs. Grayson. "The case of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder is concluded. Dr. Hartley, driven by a debt unpaid and a heart consumed by resentment, has confessed to his crime. But before I depart, I wish to reflect on what we have learned, for in every tragedy there is a lesson for the soul." Lady Beatrice, her emerald necklace catching the light, raised her head. "Monsieur Poirot, you have brought justice to my husband, and for that I am grateful. But how did you know it was Dr. Hartley? The clues, so many, seemed to point elsewhere." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile softening his features. "Madame, the clues, they are like stars in the night sky."
At 1:17, the ink smudge on the bookshelf, the misplaced book, the burned letter, the shadow seen by young Emily. These were not random. They were the footprints of a mind that planned, yet faltered. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us retrace the path." The clock, stopped at 1:17, was a deliberate act to suggest a precise time of death. But Dr. Hartley, a man of medicine, knew that rigor mortis would betray the true hour, closer to 1 o'clock, as Miss Duval's account of voices confirmed. He stopped the clock to mislead, but it was a mistake, for it drew attention to the very hour he wished to obscure. He turned to the bookshelf, gesturing toward the spot where the book on Persian artifacts had been found. This book, marked at a page describing the dagger, was touched by hands stained with ink from the desk. The blotting paper bore a signature, not Sir Reginald's, but Dr. Hartley's, written in haste during an argument. He sought to confirm the dagger's value, perhaps to justify his act, or to ensure it was the weapon he needed. Poirot's gaze settled on the fireplace, where the charred letter fragment had been found.
The letter, speaking of a debt, was burned to conceal its contents, but not entirely. The initials S.H. and the word debt remained. Dr. Hartley, a frequent guest, had lent Sir Reginald money over the years, sums for investments that failed, promises unkept. His resentment grew, festering into a motive for murder. He turned to Miss Duval, whose face was pale but composed. "Mademoiselle, your confession of hearing voices was the crack in the facade. You feared for your position, yet your courage illuminated the truth. The voices you heard were Sir Reginald and Dr. Hartley arguing over this debt. The light Emily saw, the shadow with a shiny object. These confirmed Hartley's presence in the study, where he took the dagger from the unlocked case. Emily, clutching her doll, looked up at Poirot with wide eyes. "I was so scared, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't want to tell anyone." Poirot knelt before her, his voice gentle. "Ma petite, your bravery was the key that unlocked the truth. Never doubt the power of what you see. Even as a child." He rose, addressing Langley. "Monsieur Langley, your handkerchief, stained with blood, was a clever ploy by Dr. Hartley to cast suspicion on you. Your interest in the dagger made you an easy target, but your innocence was clear to the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot." Langley exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I thought I was done for." Poirot turned to Major Blake. "Major, your debt to Sir Reginald was a distraction, but it served to muddy the waters.
Your key to the display case, however, was used, likely taken by Dr. Hartley during a visit, as he knew its hiding place from his frequent dinners here." Lady Beatrice's lips trembled. I never suspected him. He seemed so kind." "Kindness," Poirot said softly, "can mask a darker heart." Dr. Hartley's motive was not merely money, but pride, wounded by years of unacknowledged debt. He planned his crime with care, but he could not foresee the small errors, the ink, the book, the child's eyes, that betrayed him. Inspector Grayson, who had been listening with a mix of admiration and impatience, stepped forward. "Well done, Mr. Poirot. I'll admit, I was set on Langley, but your method, it's something else." Poirot inclined his head. "The method, Inspector, is simply to observe, to think, to use the little grey cells. The truth, it always reveals itself to those who seek it with clarity." As the guests began to disperse, their faces reflecting a complex mix of relief and sorrow, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami," he said, his voice low, "this case reminds us of a truth I have long held. The heart of man is a labyrinth, capable of great good and great evil. Dr. Hartley was not a villain by nature, but by circumstance and choice. We must pity him, even as we condemn him." Hastings nodded, feeling the weight of Poirot's words. "It's a grim business, Poirot, but you saw through it." As always, Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they never fail. But now, I crave a cup of tisane and the quiet of my flat. This English countryside, it is charming, but it tires the soul with its secrets." They stepped out into the hall, where Reed was preparing to lock up for the night. Poirot paused, glancing back at the library. "One final thought, Hastings," he said. "The truth, it is not merely the solution to a crime. It is a mirror, reflecting who we are. Let us hope that those who remain here learn from what they see." With that, he adjusted his hat, took up his valise,
and walked toward the waiting car, his small figure cutting a resolute path through the gathering dusk. Hastings followed, knowing that, wherever Poirot went, the pursuit of truth would never cease. Hastings, Chapter 12, The Aftermath. The morning following Dr. Hartley's arrest dawned with a fragile calm over Pendleton Hall, as though the estate itself exhaled manicured gardens, his mind replaying the dramatic reveal of the previous day. The air was lighter, yet a lingering melancholy hung over the room, a reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. Poirot's notebook, now closed, lay on the table before him, its pages filled with the meticulous notes that had unraveled the mystery of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder. The guests, Lady Beatrice, Charles Langley, Major Blake, Miss Clara Duval, young Emily Thorne, and the servants, Reed and Mrs. Grayson, sat in a loose circle, their faces etched with a mix of relief and unease. Inspector Grayson had departed with Dr. Hartley in custody, leaving behind a constable to finalize statements, but it was Poirot who commanded the room's attention, his presence a quiet anchor in the wake of the storm. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice measured and resonant, "the shadow of murder has lifted from Pendleton Hall. Yet its echoes remain. Dr. Hartley's confession has brought justice, but it has also laid bare the frailties of the human heart. Before I take my leave, I wish to address you once more, not as suspects, but as witnesses to a tragedy that reveals much about trust, betrayal, and redemption." Lady Beatrice, her emerald necklace absent today, looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Monsieur Poirot, you have given us closure, and for that I am deeply grateful. But I cannot help wondering, how did Dr. Hartley, a man we trusted, come to such an act?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint gesture of acknowledgement. "Madame, the heart is a complex organ, not merely of flesh, but of desire and grievance. Dr. Hartley was a man of pride, a physician who served Sir Reginald faithfully, yet he was bound by debts unpaid. These debts, financial, yes, but also of respect and recognition, festered. When Sir Reginald refused to honor them, Hartley's pride turned to rage, and rage to murder. It is a lesson, madame, that even the kindest heart can be corrupted by neglect." He turned to Charles Langley, whose nervous energy had subsided, replaced by a weary relief. "Monsieur Langley, you were the target of a clever deception, the blood-stained handkerchief placed to cast suspicion on you. Yet your candor about the will, though reluctant, aided the truth. Tell me, what will become of Sir Reginald's estate now?" Langley adjusted his spectacles, his voice steadier than before. "The new will stands, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Beatrice inherits the bulk of the estate, with provisions for Emily's education and future. There are also charitable bequests, as Sir Reginald intended. I'll ensure his wishes are carried out." Poirot nodded. "Man, despite his faults. I'll settle the debt with his estate, as I always meant to. It's the least I can do." Poirot's gaze softened as he turned to Miss Clara Duval, who sat with Emily, her arm around the girl's shoulders. "Mademoiselle, your courage in revealing the voices you heard was pivotal. You feared for your position, yet you chose truth over safety. What are your plans now?" Miss Duval's dark eyes met his, a flicker of determination in them. "I will stay with Emily, Monsieur Poirot. She needs stability, and I have grown fond of her. Lady Beatrice has kindly offered to keep me on." Emily looked up, her small face earnest. "I'm glad, Monsieur Poirot. You made the bad man go away." Poirot knelt before her, his smile gentle. ma petite. You played a great part in that. Your observation of the shadow, the shiny object, it was the spark that lit the truth. Never doubt the power of your eyes and heart." He rose, addressing Reed and Mrs. Grayson, who stood quietly at the room's edge. "Monsieur Reed, Madame Grayson, you served this house with loyalty, yet you saw its secrets. The shadow you saw, Monsieur Reed, and the ajar library door, Madame Grayson, these were vital clues. Your honesty has honored your master." Reed inclined his head, his face impassive but his eyes warm. "Thank you, sir. We only did our duty." Mrs. Grayson dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "It's a sad day, sir, but you've set things right." Poirot turned to the group as a whole, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "In every case, there is a moment when the truth reveals not only the crime, but the nature of those involved. Sir Reginald was a man of wealth and pride, yet he failed to see the resentment he sowed. Dr. Hartley, a man of skill and service, allowed his wounded pride to lead him to ruin. And each of you, in your way, carried secrets that shaped this tragedy. Let this be a lesson. The truth, it is a mirror, and we must face what it reflects." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "The little grey cells, they have served us well. The stopped clock, the ink smudge, the misplaced book, the burned letter, the voices, the shadow. These were the threads of a tapestry woven by a desperate hand. Dr. Hartley planned his crime, but he could not plan for the human element, the child who saw, the governess who heard, the servant who noticed. These are the details that undo even the cleverest schemes." Hastings, listening intently, felt a surge of admiration for his friend's insight. "Poirot," he said quietly,
Another day. The house feels safer with you here." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, I thank you, but my work here is done. I return to London, where a cup of tisane and a quiet evening await. But I leave you with this. Guard your heart and your home with care. Secrets, they breed tragedy." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, the train awaits, and I grow weary of this English countryside, charming though it is." They stepped into the hall, where Reed was preparing their coats. Poirot paused, glancing back at the library door. "Hastings," he said softly, "every case is a reminder that justice is not merely the capture of the guilty, but the restoration of order. We have done that here, I think." Hastings nodded, following Poirot out into the crisp morning air. As the car pulled away from Pendleton Hall, he looked back at the grand estate, its secrets now laid bare, and felt a quiet satisfaction. The truth had prevailed, as Poirot had promised, and the world, for a moment, seemed a little more just. Just as under the rive, the unseen motive, the pale light of late morning filtered through the heavy drapes of Pendleton Hall, casting a subdued glow over the drawing room, where Hercule Poirot had requested the remaining guests gather once more. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and fading flowers, a reminder of the estate's grandeur now tinged with the melancholy of recent events. Poirot, his suit as pristine as ever, stood by the grand fireplace, his silver-tipped walking stick resting against a chair. His green eyes, sharp yet contemplative, surveyed the diminished circle of Lady Beatrice, Charles Langley, Major Blake, Miss Clara Duval, young Emily Thorne, and the servants, Reed and Mrs. Grayson. Captain Hastings,
standing near a tall window overlooking the frost-kissed gardens, felt a stirring unease. Though Dr. Hartley's confession had seemingly closed the case, Poirot's request for this meeting suggested an unresolved thread in the tapestry of the crime. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant, "you may believe the matter of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder is concluded with Dr. Hartley's arrest. Yet, the little grey cells, they are restless. There is a detail, a motive unseen, that demands our attention. Today, we shall explore this shadow, for justice is not complete until every truth is laid bare." Lady Beatrice, her hands folded tightly in her lap, looked up with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, what more can there be?" Dr. Hartley confessed. The evidence was clear. The
Grey cells whisper that there is more, a deeper wound, a hidden spark that ignited his rage. We must uncover it, lest the truth remain incomplete. Charles Langley, his nervous energy returning, adjusted his spectacles. "Monsieur Poirot, I don't understand." Hartley admitted to the debt. He felt cheated, betrayed. What else could there be? Poirot raised a finger, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur Langley, a debt of money is a simple thing. But a debt of the heart, of trust, of loyalty, that is a fire that burns deeper. Let us revisit the clues, not to find the murderer, but to understand the why." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The stopped clock at 1:17, the ink smudge, the misplaced book on Persian artifacts, the burned letter fragment with the word debt and the initials S.H. These led us to Dr. Hartley. But there is another clue, one we have overlooked, the nature of Sir Reginald's relationships. He was a man of wealth, yes, but also of influence, and influence breeds envy, resentment, secrets. Poirot turned to Miss Clara Duval, whose dark eyes met his with a guarded intensity. "Mademoiselle, you heard voices in the study at 1 o'clock, an argument. You claimed the second voice was muffled, but I sense you know more. Was there a name spoken, perhaps, or a tone that hinted at something personal?" Miss Duval's lips tightened, and she glanced at Emily before answering. I cannot be certain, Monsieur Poirot. The voices were angry, but I did not hear a name. It was Sir Reginald and another man, I think. I told you all I know." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yet your hesitation, mademoiselle, speaks louder than your words. You protect someone, perhaps, or fear what you know." He turned to young Emily, whose small hands clutched her doll. "Ma petite, you saw a shadow in the study, holding something shiny. You were brave to tell us, but was there anything else, a sound, a word that you remember?" Emily's eyes widened, and she whispered, "I heard a name. Beatrice. The shadow said it, I think, before I ran away." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her throat, her face draining of colour. "That's impossible. I was in my room, asleep." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "Madame, the child does not lie. Your name was spoken in the study during an argument that preceded the murder. We must ask why." Major Blake, his military bearings stiffening, interjected, "This is outrageous, Poirot. Are you accusing Lady Too close?" Lady Beatrice rose, her voice trembling. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" "That I had some role in this. I loved my husband." Poirot raised a hand. "Madame, I suggest nothing but the truth.
Dr. Hartley's resentment was not only about money. The letter fragment, burned in the fireplace, spoke of a debt, but also of regret. I have reconstructed its meaning. It was a letter from Hartley to Sir Reginald, demanding repayment not just of money, but of honor. Hartley believed Sir Reginald had wronged him, perhaps by questioning his integrity, or by involving you, madame, in a way that wounded his pride. Langley's eyes widened. You mean an affair? Poirot shook his head. Not an affair, monsieur, but a perception. Hartley, a man of pride, may have cared for Lady Beatrice, perhaps as a friend, perhaps more. Sir Reginald's dismissive treatment of him, combined with rumors of marital discord, fueled a belief that he was protecting her honor as well as his own. Lady Beatrice sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. I never encouraged him, she whispered. Reginald and I had our difficulties, but Hartley was only a friend. He misunderstood, Poirot nodded, his expression somber. Précisément, madame. A misunderstanding, born of pride and resentment, led to murder. Hartley saw himself as a knight, avenging a slight, when in truth he was consumed by his own wounded ego. Miss Duval spoke softly, her voice breaking. I heard your name, Lady Beatrice, in the argument. I didn't want to say for fear of hurting you. Hartley was angry, shouting about betrayal. I thought it was about money, but now... Poirot turned to her. Merci, mademoiselle. Your silence protected no one, but your truth now heals. The unseen motive was Hartley's belief that Sir Reginald had wronged both him and Lady Beatrice. It was this, not just a debt, that drove the dagger into Sir Reginald's heart. He addressed the group as a whole. This is the lesson, mes amis. The heart sees what it wishes, and in doing so, can blind itself to reason. Dr. Hartley's crime was not merely one of greed, but of a pride that twisted love into vengeance. Let us learn from this, and guard our own hearts against such folly. As the guests absorbed his words, Poirot drew Hastings aside, his voice low. Mon ami, the case is truly closed now. The motive. It was not just in the evidence.
Coates. Poirot paused, glancing back at the drawing room. The truth, Hastings, it is a heavy burden, but it sets us free. Let us leave Pendleton Hall to heal and carry its lesson with us. Word count, 1,980. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Pendleton Hall, bathing the drawing room in a soft amber glow that contrasted with the lingering chill of the recent tragedy. Hercule Poirot stood near the grand fireplace, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amidst the subdued gathering. His silver-tipped walking stick rested against a chair, and his green eyes, ever observant, scanned the faces of Lady Beatrice, Charles Langley, Major Blake, Miss Clara Duval, young Emily Thorne, and the servants, Reed and Mrs. Grayson. Captain Hastings, positioned by a window overlooking the frost-dusted gardens, felt a quiet anticipation. Though Dr. Hartley's confession and the revelation of his deeper motive had seemingly resolved the case, Poirot's request for this final gathering suggested one last thread remained in the intricate tapestry of the crime. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice precise and resonant, we have uncovered the truth of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder, Dr. Hartley's act, driven by a debt of money and a deeper wound of pride and perceived betrayal. Yet, the little grey cells, they do not rest until every detail is accounted for. There is one final question. A small thread, perhaps, but one that must be tied before I depart. Today we shall address it. Lady Beatrice, her hands clasped tightly, looked up with weary eyes. Monsieur Poirot, you have brought us justice and clarity. What more could there be? The murderer is in custody, and we are trying to move forward. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint sign of his relentless curiosity. Madame, justice is a structure, but it is incomplete without every stone in place. The question that remains is this. Why was the book on Persian artifacts touched, and why was it left askew? This detail, it nags at the mind of Hercule Poirot, for it suggests another hand in the events of that fatal night. Charles Langley, his nervous energy subdued by the resolution of his own suspicion, frowned. The book? But you said it was Hartley, confirming the dagger's value. Isn't that enough? Poirot raised a finger, his gaze sharp. Enough for the crime, oui, but not for the whole truth. The book was touched after the ink smudge was made, and the smudge came from the desk where Hartley wrote his letter. Yet, the book's position, slightly askew, as if replaced in haste, suggests someone else handled it, someone who saw or knew something of the crime. Major Blake, his military posture rigid, interjected. This is speculation, Poirot, Hartley confessed.
Observation. The book was not misplaced before dinner, for Sir Reginald was meticulous about his collection. It was touched after the argument, after the murder, and left askew, a sign of interruption or panic. We must ask, who was in the library or study after 1 o'clock? Miss Clara Duval, her dark eyes guarded, spoke softly. Monsieur Poirot, I've told you all I heard, the voices, the light. I was in the corridor, not the library. I saw nothing more. Poirot nodded, his expression gentle but probing. Mademoiselle, your courage has been invaluable. Yet, your hesitation when speaking of the voices suggests a fear not just for yourself, but for another. Did you see someone else that night? Perhaps near the study? Miss Duval's lips parted, but she hesitated, glancing at Emily. The girl, clutching her doll, looked up with wide eyes. Poirot knelt before her, his voice soft. Ma petite, you have been brave beyond measure. You saw the shadow, heard the name Beatrice. But was there another moment, perhaps later, when you saw someone near the library? Emily's small hands tightened on her doll, and her voice trembled. I didn't want to say. After I saw the shadow, I went back to my room. But later, I heard a noise, like a book falling. I looked out my door, and I saw Mrs. Grayson, near the library door. A gasp escaped the group. Mrs. Grayson, standing quietly at the room's edge, paled, her hands twisting in her apron. "That's not true," she cried. "I was in my quarters, asleep." Poirot rose, his gaze steady. "Madame Grayson, the child does not lie. You were seen near the library after the murder. Why were you there?" Mrs. Grayson's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't sleep, sir. I heard a noise, a thud, and I thought it was Sir Reginald, perhaps working late. I went to check, and I saw the library door ajar. I looked inside and I saw him, lying there, the dagger in his chest. I was terrified. I touched nothing, I swear, but I pushed a book back on the shelf out of habit to tidy it. I didn't know what else to do. Poirot's expression softened. "And you said nothing, madame, out of fear?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd be blamed, sir. I'm just a housekeeper. Who would believe me?" Poirot turned to the group, his voice calm but authoritative. "This, mes amis, is the final thread. Mrs. Grayson was not the murderer, but her presence in the library explains the misplaced book. She saw Sir Reginald's body, and in her panic, she disturbed the scene, leaving the book askew. This act, innocent though it was, obscured the truth for a time. But the truth, it always finds a way. Lady Beatrice. Poirot nodded. Fear, it is a powerful silencer. But the truth, it speaks louder. Madame Grayson, your honesty now clears the final shadow from this case. The book, the ink, the clock, all are accounted for. Major Blake, his face grim, spoke up. So that's it then. The case is truly closed? Oui, Major, Poirot said. The puzzle is complete. Dr. Hartley's motive, his wounded pride and unpaid debt, led to the murder. Mrs. Grayson's innocent act confused the trail, but the little grey cells have prevailed. Miss Duval, holding Emily's hand, looked at Poirot with gratitude. Thank you, monsieur. You've given us peace. Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle, peace is the reward of truth. Guard it well. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. Mon ami, the case is finished, but it leaves us with a lesson. Even the smallest act, done in fear, can ripple through a mystery. We must always seek the why, not just the who. Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot unwavering. You saw it all, Poirot. The book, the housekeeper, it's remarkable. Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. The little grey cells, Hastings. They see what others miss. Now, let us prepare to depart. London calls, and I long for a quiet evening. As they stepped into the hall, Reed handed them their coats. Poirot paused, glancing back at the drawing room. Hastings, he said softly, every case is a mirror, reflecting the frailties of the human heart. Let us hope those who remain here learn to see clearly. The car waited outside, and as they drove away from Pendleton Hall, Hastings felt a quiet satisfaction. The final thread had been tied, and the truth, as always, had prevailed under Poirot's relentless logic. Word count 1980. Chapter 15. The Departure. The final morning at Pendleton Hall broke with a crisp clarity. The October sun casting a golden sheen over the estate's manicured lawns and ancient oaks. The grand house, though still steeped in the shadow of recent tragedy, seemed to breathe easier, as if the resolution of Sir Reginald Pendleton's murder had lifted a weight from its very stones. Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, his small, immaculate figure poised beside a polished table, his valise packed, and his silver-tipped walking stick in hand. His green eyes, ever observant, held a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the reflective melancholy that often followed a case's conclusion. Captain Hastings, adjusting his coat nearby, felt a familiar mix of admiration and relief. The mystery was solved, the truth laid bare. Investigation had begun to mend the fractures within the household. The air was scented with the faint aroma of polished wood and the fresh flowers Reed had placed in a vase, a gesture of normalcy amidst the upheaval. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice resonant with the elegant precision that defined him. My time at Pendleton Hall draws to a close. The murder of Sir Reginald Pendleton has been solved, the guilty one brought to justice, and the final threads of truth woven into place. Yet, before I depart, I wish to leave you with a reflection, for a case such as this is not merely about crime, but about the human heart and the lessons it must learn. Lady Beatrice, dressed in a simple black gown, her emerald necklace replaced by a modest locket, stepped forward. Her eyes, though still shadowed by grief, held gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, you have given us more than justice. You have given us understanding. Without you, we might have been torn apart by suspicion. How can we thank you? Poirot bowed slightly, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. Madame, the thanks of Hercule Poirot are simple. Live with truth, and guard against the secrets that breed tragedy. Your husband's death was a wound, but it has revealed the strength within this house. Use it wisely." He turned to Charles Langley, whose nervous demeanor had softened into a quiet resolve. "Monsieur Langley, you were unjustly suspected, yet you faced the ordeal with honesty. The new will, it will be executed with care, I trust." Langley nodded, his spectacles glinting in the sunlight. "It will, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Beatrice and Emily will be provided for, as Sir Reginald wished. I've learned the cost of secrets, and I'll ensure transparency in all I do." Poirot's gaze shifted to Major Blake, whose military bearing was tempered by a newfound humility. "Major, your friendship with Sir Reginald was tested by debt, yet you emerged with honor. What will you carry forward?" Blake's voice was gruff, but sincere. "I'll settle what I owe, Poirot, and live with less pride. Reginald's death showed me that friendship is worth more than money." Poirot nodded, then addressed Miss Clara Duval, who stood with Emily's hand in hers. "Mademoiselle, your courage in speaking of the voices you heard turned the tide of this case. Your devotion to Emily is a light in this dark tale. What are your hopes now?" Miss Duval's dark eyes met his, steady and warm. "To give Emily a future, Monsieur Poirot. This house has been kind to me, despite its sorrows. I'll stay and help it heal." Emily, clutching her doll, looked up at Poirot. "You're not a bad man, like I thought at first. You made things right." Poirot knelt before her, his smile gentle. "Ma petite, you are the true hero of this,"
who stood with quiet dignity. "Monsieur Reed, Madame Grayson, your loyalty to this house was tested, yet you held fast. The shadow you saw, the ajar door you found, these were the small truths that led to the greater one. You have my respect." Reed inclined his head, his face softening. "Thank you, sir." "We'll keep this house in order, as Sir Reginald would have wanted." Mrs. Grayson, her eyes misty, added, "You've given us peace, sir." Poirot turned to the group as a whole, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "This case, mes amis, was a tapestry of secrets, debts, pride, betrayal, fear. The stopped clock, the ink smudge, the misplaced book, the burned letter, the voices, the shadow, each was a thread, woven by Dr. Hartley's hand, yet undone by the small truths you each provided. The lesson is this: the human heart is fragile, but it is also resilient. It seeks truth, even when it hides from it. Let Pendleton Hall be a place of truth henceforth." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "The little gray cells, they have served us well. They saw through the net of lies to the heart of the crime, a man driven not just by debt, but by a wounded pride that twisted friendship into vengeance. Mrs. Grayson's innocent act, touching the book in panic, was the final thread, revealing the chaos of that fatal night. Now, the puzzle is complete, and I, Hercule Poirot, am satisfied." Hastings, listening intently, felt a surge of pride for his friend's brilliance. "Poirot," he said quietly, "you've done it again. You saw what none of us could, and you've left this place better than you found it." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Mon ami, it is not I who do this, but the order and method of the mind. The truth, it waits for those who seek it with clarity. But now I long for London, for a tisane, and for the simplicity of a quiet evening." They stepped into the entrance hall, where Reed handed them their hats and coats. Lady Beatrice approached, her voice soft. "Monsieur Poirot, if you ever pass this way again, Pendleton Hall will welcome you." Poirot bowed,
his expression warm. Merci, madame. But I am a creature of the city, and my work calls me elsewhere. Guard your home, and let it be a place of light. As they walked to the waiting car, the gravel crunching underfoot, Poirot paused, glancing back at the grand facade of the hall. Hastings, he said softly, every case is a journey through the labyrinth of the human soul. We have navigated this one and found our way out.
Belgian detective, with his unerring logic and quiet compassion, left behind a legacy of clarity in a house once shadowed by lies.